From a Wraithbone base coat, paint all of the red cloth areas using Flesh Terror's Red contrast paint. Paint all areas to be black with a base coat of Eshin Grey, including the cuffs, the belt, the straps across the coat and the boots. This paint doesn't have great coverage, so 2 coats will be needed. Paint all of the Eshin Grey areas using black Templar contrast. While contrast paints are generally easier with a bigger brush, it may be advisable to switch down to a smaller brush size when painting the smaller black straps. Paint all of the areas to be metallic, including the helmet, the axe head, the buttons and the belt buckle with Leadbelcher. Looking back, I probably suggest painting these areas with Eshin Grey first as well, as Leadbelcher has poor coverage over bright base coats. Shade all of the metal areas using Nuln Oil. I then shaded the armoured shoulder pads, the helmet and the axe head with Agrax Earthshade to darken down even further. You can shade the belt and the buttons as well, but to be honest they're so small it's probably not needed. Paint the trousers using Waaagh Flesh. In this model, this area is quite difficult to get to around to the front. I have yet to glue the model down, so I actually remove the model from the base to get at these areas, which is probably the easiest way to do it. Shade the trousers with Krieg Camo contrast paint. Shade what I presume is fur around the guard's head with Skeleton Horde contrast paint. Skeleton Horde is one of the thinner of the contrast paint range, so I would suggest keeping the layer nice and thick to make sure it fills in all the detail in the recesses. To make the transition to the darker colour as seen on the box art, I then used Wyldwood contrast and actually continued with the Wyldwood contrast layer before the Skeleton Horde layer had dried. This allows them to mix slightly to make not so much a sharp edge between the two colours. I also turned the model upside down and pulled all the brush strokes towards the top of the head so that any excess contrast wouldn't float downward and ruin the effect. Paint all the flesh areas, so the hands and the face and any areas poking through the cloth, with Plaguebearer Flesh contrast paint. I found that this shade alone gave it a more washed out appearance than I liked, so then I proceeded to shade all of the flesh areas with Athonian Camoshade. This serves to increase the contrast and darken down the overall colour of the flesh. Paint the areas on the hand where the skin is missing with Magos Purple contrast. For the handle of the axe, start with Skeleton Horde contrast paint, covering the entire length of the axe handle. I attempted to match the box art in this case by first mixing Skeleton Horde contrast and Wyldwood contrast together and painting these towards the top and bottom ends of the axe handle. To smoothen the transition, I then painted pure contrast medium where the two colours meet. And further layer of Wyldwood contrast was painted at the extreme top and bottom of the axe handle. Paint the gums with a layer of Screamer Pink. Wash this colour then with Carroburg Crimson shade. Paint the beard with Apothecary White, making sure to keep it a thick layer so that the deepest recesses collect enough colour to make the effect noticeable. To deepen the contrast effect on the cloak, paint the deeper recesses with a mix of Flesh Tear's Red and Black Templar 1:1 with some contrast medium added. Also use this thinned down paint to paint down the lower ends of the cloaks, the sharper and the deeper recesses. Highlight the sharper edges on the cloak first with Evil Sunz Scarlet. For areas of the cloak edge, you can just use the edge of the brush, particularly kind of where the middle of the coat opens and any of the sharper cuts. Any areas that aren't so sharp, so the more pronounced folds, paint a edge highlight along these areas in the Evil Sunz Scarlet. Paint the sharpest edges with Fire Dragon Bright, so most noticeably the corners of the torn cloak or any tears within the fabric of the cloak proper, using either straight lines or the edge of the brush where you can on the sharper corners. Also the deeper recesses were given an edge highlight of this colour. Edge highlight the trousers with Skarsnik Green. On this particular model, the trousers aren't all that noticeable, so pick out any sharp areas you see and that's all you really need to do. Edge highlight the black areas, first using Dark Reaper. Most of these are fairly overt, so the torn edges of the cuffs and any tears in the middle, the sharp edges along the strapping and along the belts, and then any more prominent areas on the boots. Pick out the sharpest edges with a second highlight of Fenrisian Grey, keeping this highlight limited to the most prominent corners on the material, because a lot of this colour will make it look very cartoonish very quickly, so it is a case of less is more. Highlight the raised areas of the gums with pink horror. Dot highlight the gums with Cadian Fleshtones just in the most prominent areas. Pick out the teeth with the base coat of Zandri Dust. Paint over the teeth then with Screaming Skull, covering pretty much the whole tooth. Edge highlight the lighter wooden areas, also using Screaming Skull. Edge highlight the darker wood areas using Gorthor Brown. Use this colour to extend slightly into the lighter coloured areas, as this will help unify the two colours so they're not seemingly as kind of disjoint as they otherwise would look. Base coat what I think are eyelids with Stegadon Scale Green. I'm not entirely sure what the eye story is with these guys, but I tried to copy the box art, so have fun. Highlight the eyes using Sotek Green. Finish the eyes with a second highlight using Temple Guard Blue. At this stage I felt the pink fleshy areas were too dark in colour, and this is probably because of the two shades prior, making the surface too dark for the contrast. So paint these areas now with Screamer Pink to restore this colour. Pick out the tendon on the exposed left hand with Wraithbone. Edge highlight the skin using Krieg Khaki. Most noticeably then would be the areas around the sores on the hands, the knuckles, the raised part to the face, and particularly on the right hand in this model there's some model detail of the wrinkles in the skin, and use this colour to edge highlight these areas as well. Paint the nails first with a base coat of Gorthor Brown. Paint over the nails using Screaming Skull and thin brush strokes in the direction of the nail growth, giving the effect of kind of striations on the nail. Edge highlight all of the silver areas using Stormhost Silver, so the edges of the shoulder pauldrons, the axe, the buttons and the belt. I didn't highlight the keys in this case just because I thought they looked a bit more old and worn, but you can go ahead and highlight those as well. You can stop here if you'd like, but I tried to add some rust effects, and to do so started by picking out areas where I thought rust would accumulate. So on the recesses on the pauldrons, on the pockmarks on the axe blade, and then a couple of random areas on the flat surface of the blade. Firstly with a thinned layer of Doombull Brown, painting into the recesses like simple layering, and then stippling it on to the flatter surfaces. Once the Doombull Brown is dry, repeat the process in smaller areas using watered down Skrag Brown, again in the deeper recesses, the marks on the axe head that you've picked out already, and then any of the pock marks then as well. Finally, paint thin down Troll's Lair Orange in the smallest areas, so in the middle of the pockmarks, the centre of the flat area of rust, and the deeper recesses on the pauldrons, to complete the rust effect. And this is the completed model. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with the latest Cursed City and other Warhammer painting videos.